He was standing on his own driveway, minding his business, the low hum of a fuel pump cutting through a quiet suburban morning. No argument, no crime, just a man saying no. But for her, that refusal was unforgivable. One phone call later, flashing lights were on the way, and a familiar pattern began to unfold. Suspicion, entitlement, and a dangerous assumption about who belonged and who didn't. What started as a petty demand quickly exposed something far darker than neighborhood drama. And the truth she never bothered to learn would change everything. If she had known who she was really calling the police on, she might have thought twice. But by then, it was already too late. Marcus Kellerman's life had settled into a quiet rhythm that didn't ask much of the world. Morning started early, coffee strong, hands busy. The garage was his refuge, a place where the smell of diesel and steel drowned out memories he wasn't ready to confront. After losing his wife, he'd learned to survive by staying useful, staying focused, staying invisible. Willowbrook Estates was supposed to help with that. A modest house, tree-lined streets, neighbors who waved and kept to themselves. The kind of place where nothing unexpected was supposed to happen. Marcus wasn't flashy. He didn't attend block parties or gossip at mailboxes. He worked, fixed old trucks, and quietly helped when people needed it. During power outages, his fuel pump kept generators running. Medical machines stayed alive. Freezers didn't fail. No announcements. No credit taken. Just a man doing what he thought was right in a community that seemed to appreciate it, at least at first. But normalcy in places like Willowbrook came with conditions. There were unspoken rules about who fit the image and who didn't, who looked right driving certain vehicles, who made some people uncomfortable simply by existing outside expectations. And at the center of enforcing those rules stood the HOA, newly led by someone who believed authority meant control. Marcus noticed a shift slowly. Warning letters that didn't make sense. Scrutiny that felt selective. A tone that wasn't about safety, but dominance. He brushed it off, assuming logic would prevail. Paperwork existed. Permits were valid. Facts were on his side. What Marcus didn't realize was that, to someone driven by entitlement and bias, facts don't matter. Perception does. And once he was labeled a problem, his quiet life became a target. He thought the worst would be fines or harassment. He had no idea how far she was willing to go or how ugly things were about to get. The tension didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, quiet and calculated, wrapped in paperwork and polite threats. It started with notice taped to Marcus's door, heavy with official language and fake concern. Violations. Hazards. Community risk. Words designed to intimidate, not inform. He read it twice, then a third time, feeling that familiar tightening in his chest, the one he'd felt years ago when he learned how easily authority could be weaponized against the wrong person. More notices followed, each one harsher than the last. Fines increased. Deadlines shortened. The message was clear: comply or be crushed. What made it worse was how selective it all felt. Other neighbors broke rules openly. Trailers parked for weeks, illegal extensions, unpermitted sheds. Nothing happened to them. But Marcus's home was suddenly under constant watch. Cars slowed near his driveway. Phones were raised. Notes were taken. He could feel eyes on him every time he stepped outside. Then came the meetings. Rooms filled with neighbors who once smiled now avoided eye contact. Fear does that. It makes people quiet. It makes them complicit. PowerPoint slides painted Marcus as a danger, a threat, an outsider disrupting community values. The language was careful, sanitized, but the undertone was unmistakable. He didn't belong, and no amount of permits or facts could change that narrative once it took hold. What hurt most wasn't the accusations. It was the silence, the way people he'd helped during storms now hesitated to speak up, the way discomfort outweighed truth. Racism rarely announces itself with slurs anymore. It hides behind policy, behind safety concerns, behind the excuse of just following the rules. Then the calls started. Anonymous complaints. City inspectors showing up unannounced. Accusations of illegal activity so absurd they bordered on parody, until Marcus realized the danger. Each complaint created a paper trail. Each visit added weight to a lie that could eventually bury him. That's how it works. Not one big injustice, but dozens of small ones stacking up until the truth can't breathe. One morning, unfamiliar figures wandered his property, taking photos like he was evidence. No introductions, no explanations, just cameras and cold stares. Marcus knew that look. Fake authority. The kind that feeds on fear and assumes compliance. He shut it down, but the message was loud and clear. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about forcing him out. Online, the narrative exploded. Posts warning about dangerous fuel stockpiles. Comments about declining property values. Fake profiles amplifying fear. Manufactured outrage spreading faster than facts ever could. Marcus watched neighbors argue in common threads. Reality bending under the weight of repetition. Truth doesn't go viral. Fear does. Then came the most reckless move of all, a formal complaint accusing Marcus of harassment and intimidation. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so dangerous. A false report, filed with confidence, designed to flip the roles. Victim into aggressor, authority into threat. It was a classic tactic, and a deadly one in the wrong hands. Marcus knew this wasn't random. This was escalation. Desperation dressed as confidence. Whoever was pulling the strings believed pressure would break him, that isolation would make him retreat, that the system would do what it's done to so many others, close ranks and look away. But something didn't add up. The intensity, the persistence, the willingness to cross legal lines. This wasn't just personal bias. It was fear of being exposed, fear of someone who wouldn't back down. As Marcus began documenting everything, every notice, every lie, every manufactured complaint, he realized the truth was bigger than him. This wasn't just racism playing out in a suburban neighborhood. It was corruption hiding behind it. And the closer he looked, the clearer it became. What he was about to uncover wouldn't just stop the harassment. It would bring everything crashing down. The moment arrived without warning, heavy and irreversible. Sirens cut through a quiet street, sharp and accusing, drawing curtains open and neighbors to their windows. Patrol cars rolled in slowly, deliberate, as if already convinced something was wrong. Marcus stood still on his own driveway, aware of how quickly a situation like this could spiral when assumptions replace facts. He had seen it before. Men judged before a word was spoken. Outcomes decided before truth was allowed in the room. The air felt tight, suffocating. Phones were raised. Whispers spread. A simple refusal had turned into a public spectacle, and the weight of it pressed down on him all at once. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was dangerous. A single misstep, a single misunderstanding, and the story could end very differently. Not because he was guilty, but because history said men like him didn't always get the benefit of doubt. Authority surrounded him now, uniforms and badges reflecting sunlight, like mirrors forcing him to see the reality of the moment. The accusations came fast, confident, rehearsed, threatening, designed to paint him as aggressive, uncooperative, suspicious. The kind of narrative that had ruined lives long before this neighborhood ever existed. Marcus felt the familiar anger rise, but he kept his body calm, his breathing steady. Survival demanded it. Then everything shifted. Paperwork changed hands. Names were checked. A pause stretched longer than it should have. Confusion replaced certainty. Eyes that once held judgment now held disbelief. The story they thought they were walking into no longer made sense. And in that silence, the truth landed like a thunderclap. Marcus wasn't who they assumed he was. He wasn't powerless. He wasn't defenseless. And he wasn't alone. The realization rippled outward, hitting witnesses first, then authority, then finally the person who had made the call. Control slipped away. The power dynamic shattered. What was meant to intimidate now exposed something far worse than refusal. It exposed motive. Racism doesn't expect resistance. It expects silence. It expects fear. But standing there, with the truth undeniable in the eyes of the community watching, Marcus understood this moment was bigger than him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about accountability, and what happens next would change everything. The street eventually went quiet again, but nothing returned to how it was before. The accusations collapsed under their own weight, exposed by facts, records, and the truth that could no longer be ignored. The call that was meant to punish instead revealed a pattern of entitlement, of bias, of someone so certain of their power that they never imagined consequences. Marcus went back inside his home that day, but he carried the moment with him. The looks, the assumptions, the reminder that safety can disappear in seconds when prejudice decides a story before evidence ever does. What followed wasn't celebration. It was reckoning. The people who had watched in silence were forced to confront their own discomfort. Some apologized quietly. Others avoided eye contact altogether. And a few, braver than most, began asking the hard questions they should have asked long before. Why was suspicion so easy to accept? Why did authority move faster against some people than others? And how many times had something like this happened without the truth ever coming out? Marcus didn't need vindication. He needed accountability, not just for himself, but for every person who didn't have the protection of knowledge, paperwork, or position, for those who had been intimidated into compliance, for those whose lives had been disrupted or destroyed by the same assumptions he faced that day. Racism doesn't always look like hatred. Sometimes it looks like a phone call made with confidence. Sometimes it sounds like concern. Sometimes it wears the mask of community standards while doing very real harm. The experience changed how Marcus saw his neighborhood, but it also strengthened his resolve. Silence protects injustice. Documentation exposes it. Standing firm doesn't always feel heroic, but it matters, because when one person refuses to be erased, it creates space for others to speak. This wasn't just a story about one driveway, one accusation, or one entitled decision. It was a mirror held up to a system that too often trusts bias over truth, a reminder that racism adapts, evolves, and survives when people look away. But it also showed something else, that it can be challenged, disrupted, and defeated when light is forced into places it was never meant to reach. So the question isn't whether this kind of story still happens. It does. Every day. The real question is this: when you see it happening, will you stay silent, or will you stand up and make sure the truth is heard?